Hello, my friends. Alicia Lynn Diaz here, transformational healer and creator of the Enlightened Body System and the Soul of Healing Summit. And I'm really excited today because this is one of the first interviews that I've hosted since the Soul of Healing Summit. And I have my good friend and colleague, Jennifer Taviv here, who is the director of HealthMeans, which is the company that produced my online summit. And her and I have connected over the last couple years, and she's interviewed me. And I found out behind the scenes that she has a really profound healing story. And I was so inspired by her story that I decided to bring her here today to share with you an inspirational healing message of her own inner journey around healing, some of the physical things she did, some of the mental, emotional things she did, and some of the spiritual things that she did as this really integrative approach to health and healing. So Jennifer, thank you, first of all, for being here with me and being in this conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And, I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but I'm so excited. I just saw one of my girlfriends before this and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to interview this woman who healed herself from blindness. And she was like, what? When is that coming out? When can I watch it? Right. So Jennifer has this amazing healing story about how she healed herself from something that most people and most Western doctors will say is incurable, unhealable. And many of you who might be listening to this might be on a path that is struggling and challenging and makes you wonder what's going to work, if anything's going to work. And I feel like your story, Jennifer, was one that was really, really inspiring. So I would love to just start with, what was kind of the overarch of that experience, that journey? What was really going on for you? And what are some of the steps that you took to resolve that?
Sure. Yeah, it is a crazy story. I definitely want to start by saying that I did not heal myself. There's no way that I can take all the credit for that. I have an amazing team of healers around me. And a lot of the journey of getting better was about realizing that I had to build a kind of a tribe for myself, a sort of healing tribe, and bring people on board and enroll them in hey, we're going to do the impossible now and get me better. And so it is an amazing tribe of physicians and surgeons and, functional medicine practitioners and shamans and therapists, like just everybody who got on board with my healing journey. So I want to start there with, one of the sorry, I have a dog in the background, part of my healing. Come here, girl. One of the, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Okay. But yeah, so there were a lot of people involved in the healing journey. And one of the most, I think, important lessons that I learned, important and hardest, one of the hardest lessons to learn was actually that I cannot do it myself. And so more than I didn't heal myself and I brought all these other people aboard, was that I learned that I cannot do it myself and I could not do it myself. And letting go of that idea, I look back and think certainly in dealing with the illness and then in dealing with being blind, which was like just totally a journey of complete surrender, and that I cannot be an island unto myself psychologically or even practically speaking. That was such an important lesson, and part of my healing was learning how to ask for help and learning how to invite people in, and learning how to talk about what my needs were. So I think like even being here today and talking with you is like, yeah, this would not have happened 10 years ago. Like, no. Yeah. So what is my story? So I'll give like a really sort of broad picture overview of the actual health view. I was 2 weeks out from delivering my second daughter. I have 2 awesome daughters. And I was 2 weeks out from delivering my youngest, and I started to have visual issues. I started to have like fireworks in my eyes and pain and like weird headaches and stuff like that. Now I had just gone through a really exhausting pregnancy and birth. I had a hyperemesis. So I was sick my entire pregnancy with both my pregnancies. And I was also breastfeeding in the beginning of that pregnancy. So I was like physically and nutritionally drained for a long period of time.
Wow.
And I gave birth. It was it was an amazing birth. I had an amazing team of midwives and healers. I was also I made an all women environment. So it was an amazing birth, but it was a pretty traumatic one. I had my placenta detached and I hemorrhaged. So I was in recovery from that. And my daughter was also in recovery with me. She had failed her APGAR scores and she had to be resuscitated at birth. So there was this, these few days and few weeks after I'd given birth, and I decided to do the sleep-in approach, sort of the John Lennon, Yoko Ono style of parenting, where I just went home. I actually went home early. I left the hospital early. Hospitals are not places to get well, as far as I'm concerned. And I had me and my newborn daughter and my older daughter, who was 3 at the time. And I said, okay, we're all just going to like be as naked as possible and be in this bed as much as possible, skin to skin and cuddling. And we did that. And so we were doing that. And it was really great for me and for my daughter, but I started to lose my vision during this time. So at some point, it got scary enough that I, turned to my husband at the time and said, I think that we need to go to the ER. Like, I think I'd never had any issues with my eyes. I had issues, but not anything acute. And we went to the ER, and we were living in South Florida at the time. So this wasn't a university hospital or anything. It was just like a small kind of rural area. And I went in and they did the eye exam, and, some like 27-year-old eye doctor was like, no, you're fine. There's nothing wrong. And I'm like, if that had been the last time that I heard that, it would have been enough. But it was not, of course, the last time that I heard that, as anyone who's been in a chronic health journey knows. And I was like, no, I'm not fine. Something's going on. But they discharged me and they sent me home, and they told me that I was fine, and they didn't run any tests. And it was a couple of more weeks before I got in front of someone who did know what was going on. And I was diagnosed with a really rare disease of the retina that is an autoimmune disease. So it's a disease where the immune system attacks the retinas in particular. And it was pretty aggressive. And within a matter of weeks, I had developed enough scar tissue that my pupils stopped dilating. I stopped being able to tolerate bright lights. And before the end of that month, I stopped being able to drive. I couldn't see, the colors change on the lights anymore. And I was really rapidly losing my vision at that point. And what they did to me, what they do to pretty much anyone who walks into a medical facility with an acute chronic inflammatory issue, which is that they threw prednisone at me. So I was on a ton of prednisone. I think I was on 60 milligrams. And I was taking ocular prednisone. They were just throwing the kitchen sink at me. And I was still trying to recover from my birth. So I was I think about 120 pounds over my ideal weight, my normal body weight. And I was breastfeeding. And I was now obviously in enormous panic and stress because I was rapidly losing my vision and was the caretaker for 2 little kids at that time. So it was really rough. It was really anxiety provoking. And it became really clear that we needed to, I'm from New York City, I'm from Manhattan. And it became really clear that we needed to move back to Manhattan, and that we needed to go, that we understood quickly that there were very few specialists in this condition in the United States, and that all of them were in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. So we packed everything up and we came back to New York. Wow. It was I am fast forwarding through a journey that I bet all your listeners can relate to, right? Like months and months of seeing this doctor and that doctor, being given this medication and that medication, those medications wreaking complete havoc on me physically and mentally, and being financially draining and psychologically draining, and taking a real toll on our lives. And then one night the pain was so bad that I ended up in the New York Eye and Ear ER downtown, which is thankfully New York City has emergency rooms for the eye. which is a rare thing in more rural places. And we went, and I ended up in the care of the head of the hospital because by luck, he had pulled the short straw and had to be the attending in the ER. Which is like, it was his bad luck was my great fortune on that night. And I'm really grateful that I met that team. And so I started under his care. And while I was at that point going in every day, and they were injecting steroids directly into the back of my eye, into my retina. And I was having those injections daily. And then they moved to weekly capsules where they were injecting capsules into the back of my eye. And I was in pain, and I was, but at this point, functionally blind, no longer able to push a stroller down the street, certainly not able to drive or anything like that. So it was real crisis mode of trying to save my vision. And at the same time, I was physically ill. I was constantly I had abdominal pain that landed me in an ER a few times, that they sort of, maybe it was my gallbladder, that sort of thing. And I was just aching and in pain and deeply, deeply depressed. And they were just throwing everything at me. So they first did the prednisone, and then they did different forms of chemotherapy, different forms of immune suppressants, different types of biologics at the same time as they were injecting steroids. So it was harrowing. It was exhausting. It was demoralizing, but it was also in those rooms that the first time they had a resident in the room one day while they were doing the injection in my eye. And he was just leaning over. Because I have such a rare disease, everybody always wanted to see what was going on, which was kind of nice. It was nice to be like the most popular patient. And so he wanted to come in and have a look, and he has a look. And then he leans back and he looks at me and he says, this is a really, really, really rare side effect of a gluten allergy. Do you happen to be allergic to gluten? Have you ever been tested for celiac disease? And that was, I was at that point eating, garbage, grilled cheese, and I was pregnant. So when you're pregnant, you're like, whatever I don't throw up, I will eat. Mm-hmm. And then I was in the postpartum, and I just was really eating convenience foods, and I did not have a good diet. And I was always physically active, but I didn't really understand how to take care of myself. So I'd never heard this concept before. And I said, no, nobody's ever said that to me. And he said, okay, well, you might want to look it up when things settle down. Or you might want to go. And that was the first time anyone had suggested a relationship to blindness and my gut.
Like my chills just hearing that, and just that moment of awakening to that possibility.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was like, whew. And at the time, I just thought it was a weird suggestion. Looking back, it was the shift. It was the moment that I started to think about, like, maybe I need to think beyond my eyes, and maybe all of us need to be thinking beyond my eyes. And when an otherwise perfectly healthy woman in her late 20s suddenly goes blind, we need to think bigger picture. And until then, it just had not occurred to me. I bought into that Western idea that your eyes are over here and your feet are down here and they're not connected, and that you go to this doctor for this and that doctor for that. And this was the first time that I thought, maybe I need to rethink my relationship to my body. So I did a bunch of research, and and again, I have an amazing community of friends and family. So I didn't do this all alone. People are sitting here going, how could she research? The answer is I couldn't. I was blind. And I had a lot of people help me with that. And I went to the doctor, and I scheduled an appointment with the doctor. And then I decided, okay, I started reading about the AIP diet, the autoimmune protocol diet. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to do this. I have nothing to lose. I'm just going to do it. And I cut gluten and dairy and soy out of my diet. I think I didn't cut out soy until later, but gluten and dairy I cut out immediately. And I had scheduled an appointment to go see a regular physician. And within 2 weeks, within 10 days, it was like, I get crazy thinking about it. Like, it was like somebody flipped a switch in my body, and I felt what it felt like to be alive inside my body for the first time. And like an entire lifetime of lethargy and sort of frustration with myself just evaporated. I had an insane amount of energy for the first time ever. And I had mental clarity for the first time ever. And, you know, my abdominal pain started to lift, everything shifted. And this, I wasn't particularly eating healthy at this point. I just stopped eating this thing that, of course, it turned out much, much later I was severely allergic to.
Wow.
And so that, you know, cutting out dairy and gluten, and I cut them out that day. It's now been nearly 8 years. I haven't touched them since. And it's hard for me even to remember the first, you know, 3 decades of my life, how tired I was and how sick I always felt, and how I had just thought of those things as normal and didn't realize that they weren't normal until they left me. And so I think of that really as the beginning of understanding that, you know, that we have this entire, and I studied science, by the way. So it was like, I didn't know this as pre-med. I didn't know this, you know, studying science. And that was really the changing point in my understanding that the physical connections between those things. But incidentally, the blood test that I took for celiac was negative. It took 5 more years before I got a positive celiac diagnosis. And
5 more years.
5 more years. And I got it on a biopsy. They eventually did a colonoscopy biopsy. And that was when they confirmed the diagnosis. But so I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, that gluten thing, they did the blood. It's like thyroid, you know, people, oh, they said my thyroid was normal. And it's like, okay, let's define normal for a minute. And let's talk a little bit about, you know, you don't have to disagree with everything your doctor says, but you have to do your homework, and you have to understand that these tests are not, you know, they're not the holy grail, and we have to think about that sort of stuff. So yeah, I came up negative on every single blood test. It wasn't until much, much later that I got a positive diagnosis, and that my kids ultimately got positive diagnosis for celiacs as well.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of that journey. And then from there, you know, from the physical standpoint, I discovered functional medicine and functional medicine practitioners, and started to move down the road of looking at the autoimmune is multifactorial, and looking at every single factor and sort of reshaping my own understanding of how to relate to my body. And I learned all kinds of important things, like that I had mold toxicity, that I tested positive for some really dangerous molds, and that I had some pretty significant polymorphism, genetic polymorphisms that significantly impair the ability of my cells to detox. And as you know this, and I'm sure many of your listeners know this, as you piece together all these different parts, okay, I've got the mold toxicity, okay, I've got the heavy metal thing, oh, look at these genetic, you know, look at these SNPs that are telling me that actually I don't detox like a normal person. When I look at it now, it's like, well, it's kind of a miracle I didn't get sick sooner. And, you know, and it's kind of a miracle that I carried healthy pregnancies, and not kind of, it is a miracle. So that was the journey. I ultimately lost about 115 pounds. And I did not do that by trying to diet. I did that simply by just removing everything toxic. That was it. And I was not in a position to be thinking about going to Weight Watchers or going to the gym. I was blind, and I wasn't particularly graceful before. I have a friend who's blind, and he keeps winning Ironmans. And I'm like, I'm like, chill. Like, I couldn't get on a treadmill with sight. Like, just relax with your winning Ironmans. So I wasn't very good at it to begin with. So that was sort of the physical health piece. At that point, I was completely blind, and the damage was done. Sort of like the house had been set on fire and had burned down, and we needed to figure out what to do. We had been able to put out that fire, right? That inflammatory fire that was burning in my retinas and in my body. We were able, through, as I said, significant dietary and nutritional changes and lifestyle changes, and also through medicine. And people get really scared to talk about pharmaceutical medicines, and they should. They're scary, they're intense, but absolutely conventional medicine played an important role in rolling back the tide of that long enough for me to do the kind of important, the gut healing work and the detoxing work and that sort of stuff. It took another, I think 7 surgeries before they were able to restore my vision. And each one of those surgeries was, like months of preparing my body to be able to handle surgery. I went through, I think, the first 5 surgeries, and then they were able to kind of bring it back a little bit, and they were just gradually working on it, and they still are. I still have little laser procedures to clean away things every now and then. And then at the 5th surgery, right after the 5th surgery, I developed glaucoma, which is unfortunately a side effect of steroids. And I would say that probably 60% of the symptoms that I dealt with in the most recent years and now are the results of the pharmaceutical drugs that I've been on. So the original illness itself is more or less handled. And now I'm cleaning up the mess of years of terrible drugs. And this steroid, it's called steroid-induced glaucoma. And I developed that. And I went to a number of, here in New York City, we are very lucky that we can have experts at our fingertips. And I went to a number of great surgeons who all gave me like 3 months before I would be completely and irreversibly blind. So I look at that as sort of that was the scariest moment for me, because there I had already come very far. I had already been like 5 years into the journey, and I had figured out all those things, and I was seeing that, functional medicine practitioners and doing all the right things. And that moment where they were like, no, even with everything you've done, you're going to be a blind, young, single mother at that point was probably the darkest period for me. And I was going through divorce by then. So it was all pretty scary. And then the second half of that journey, I think, is the one in which I did the emotional work and where I did the spiritual work. And I did have 2 more surgeries. I did have a number of treatments using different forms of immunosuppressants and biologics. And ultimately, and I say with enormous gratitude to some really gifted and committed surgeons who refused to give up on me, and kept at it and kept taking me into the room and kept doing it. I was able to restore my sight, and I've been in remission for about 3.5 years. So I've had my vision back for 3.5 years, but I was blind for close to 3 years. I didn't see my youngest daughter's face until she was almost 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the shortest I've ever told that, but an overview of journey.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. What an incredible journey. And, one of the things that's really striking is your tenacity to keep, moving forward, to get a clue and to then dive in deep to research and to ask for support. So, gosh, there's so many questions I have for you, but I think the first one is, I think one of the things that my tribe struggles with is the information overload. And as they start researching all the different possible things, it's just, they're almost paralyzed, dead in their tracks. And then it becomes all the added emotions and fear-based things that come up as they research, right? There's just so many cascades of possibilities and directions you can go down, and then the advice contradicts with one another. So I'm just curious, what was your practice for cutting through that and coming back to your own trust, or, sifting through what actually was what you needed to do for your next steps?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I think information overload is such a great description for it. And I think also when we're ill, there's a lot of well-meaning people, and unfortunately some not well-meaning people, who gravitate toward us or try to give us a lot of advice, and or have a hard time with our pain, and so want to fix us, but are can be somewhat belligerent in that. And I think it is really important to go inward, and it is really important to know what your personal radar is for true and not true with anything that's suggested to you, and to give yourself permission to say no to things that even that other people think is a good idea. I remember really, really early on in my process of healing that there was this woman who kept talking to me about turmeric. And I'd never, when you're ready, you're like, okay, turmeric, whatever. I'd never heard anything. Now I take it all the time, right? I have like all my turmeric pastes and, and all the different things that I use. But at the time I had never heard of it. And she was, I think she was well-meaning, but she was really attached to me taking her advice, and it became really aggressive. And I think I was like the trifecta of disability. I was blind and I had little children and I was also physically ill. And so I felt like I was a target for other people's criticism, and I felt extremely vulnerable. And she kept, every time I would see her, which was like often for some reason, I don't know why I kept running into her, she would like yell at me about this turmeric. And I remember being like, enough with your effing turmeric. Like, I'm not taking it. Leave me alone. And it was such a strong and visceral reaction. And it was a reaction to her, not to the turmeric. But it was important. I think I say that by way of illustrating that it is important to have boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have boundaries before I got sick. And so everything felt overwhelming. And at the same time, I was terrible at asking for what I needed. Mm-hmm. And in terms of not being paralyzed and learning how to make decisions, I think the first thing that we need to do is know ourselves. And we can't know ourselves if we don't make boundaries and we don't start to discriminate what is me and what is out there. And how do I draw walls and keep myself safe and build some integrity for myself. And once we do that, that certainly becomes, it creates a way for us to make informed decisions with our own intuition. It creates like a path by which, and I literally think of it as a process, like you have like a process for taking off a plane, you have like your checklist for flying a plane. I'm saying this as if I know, as if you know. And nobody wants me. I am legally allowed to get a license, a flight license. So I'm actually going to do it.
Just because it can. Why not?
I can, because like someone who used to be blind should learn how to, I don't know. It feels very like, something to do to shake
it's like the ultimate ticket of freedom, like the
exactly.
ultimate, like.
Exactly. I met a pilot and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Anyway, it's important to build a process by which you can say, this is who I am. This is how I know if something feels good for me. And this is how I know if something doesn't. And then it's really, really, really important to immediately and completely and never again judge yourself about the decisions that you make once you do that. Mm. And so that ability to tell that woman, no, I don't want your turmeric, even though the turmeric itself turned out to be a great thing, it was really important for me to say no. And that was part of the journey. So people are going to make all kinds of suggestions to you. If you have a chronic, well, people make all kinds of suggestions no matter what, walking down the street. But here in New York, it's just constant. But to be able to weather that with healthy boundaries, and then to just take, it's okay to not do everything. It's okay to take one thing at a time. I spent a year just not eating gluten and just learning how to breathe. And, that process where I was talking about lifting out of that fog, I was in a deep, deep postpartum depression that lasted for a really, really long time. So we can sit here and talk about the physical and everything I did all day, but the real work was in coping with that depression and in coping with what was happening for me psychologically, and putting one foot in front of the other and learning how to say things like yes to this and no to that. And it's so important to, I once heard, Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No.
She's amazing. I'm going to send you the links to all her stuff. She wrote some really beautiful books that were really impactful for me on my journey. And one of my favorite lines from her is, it's amazing what becomes available to you after you learn how to survive the disappointment of saying no, or the not the disappointment for yourself, but disappointing others, learning how to say no to other people and live through their disappointment. Mm. And then what becomes available for you is that clarity about what's yes. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer, what you were looking for, but it helped me get through the overwhelm of making choices about what was right for my health.
Absolutely. And I think one of the characteristics, at least of personality, that I know for me when I was going through my debilitating health journey and struggles, and a lot of my tribe here, is that there is a little bit of almost aloofness or disconnection with our own emotion, because there's a disconnection from the body. Like you said, you learned how to relate to your body more deeply, yeah. But there's also like, there's a leadership quality that almost needs to be reclaimed. And one of the things we say in the enlightened body system is like, I am the leader of my cells.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's to say, like, all of the practitioners, I love how you said, like, I didn't do this alone, right? Like, I had a whole team around me, and I feel like so many of us feel isolated on this journey, but it's a merging between us taking our power back and claiming our yes, claiming our no, being the leader of our cells and our body, and also leaning in for support, but like taking the information that you gather and then using the flame of your own discernment.
Yeah.
Right? Because all the practitioners and doctors and experts that you learn from are the signposts. They're not the ones driving the car.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from that journey is that was like a big kind of like you were able to reclaim your own power, so to speak, in that healing journey, and start to delineate and build your discernment in that.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I had lots of really well-meaning and loving and educated professionals say things to me. And I'm really glad that I was able to say, thank you so much, no.
Yeah.
And that became so powerful. And it freed up the ability for me to learn how to say yes, and learn how to invite people in to help me, and learn how to give to others, and learn how to let other people say no. And, and hear their no. We have a really hard time with that in this world, just being with no. And so it was definitely an important feature of that journey for me, 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I know you have a hard stop time today. Maybe this is part one of, there's so much more I want to go into with you. Maybe in our next episode, can dive into some of your personal practices around relating to your body. And I know you have a wealth of feminine wisdom that you've studied. So maybe that would be the next, our next episode. But in the meantime, what are any last words of encouragement that you'd like to share with our audience?
Last words of encouragement. Ooh. I think, I think it's really, really important to look in the mirror and love yourself. And I'll tell you one experience that I had, before we hop off. I regained my vision, and as I told you, so I had given birth and I lost about 115 pounds, and it had been about 3 years. So I had not seen anyone, including myself, in that period of time. And when I regained my vision after the surgeries, I went home and I took a shower. After, you have to wait. So I was like, gross. And it was time for me to take a shower like 48 hours later or something. And I'm in the shower, and I took the bandages off my eyes, and I get out of the shower, and I'm standing there in my towel, and I'm facing the mirror, and I look, and when you lose your vision, the cognitive connections, they decay pretty quickly. So it took me a very long time, and I actually still struggle with it. People will go, what is that? And they'll point to a car, and I'll be like, and then I'll remember it's a car. So that recognition takes a while to recover. So I'm standing there, I'm looking in the mirror, and I'm not realizing that I'm looking in a mirror, because this was right after I'd regained my vision. And I look in the mirror, and the first thought that pops into my head at that moment was, wow, look at that really beautiful woman. And just really casually off the top of my head, the way that, if you're walking down the street and you saw someone in a beautiful party dress, you go, oh, she looks so pretty in your head, or whatever it is. So it was that, oh, look at that pretty woman over there. Look at that beautiful woman. And then about a second later, I thought, how interesting. She looks so much like my grandmother when my grandmother was young. And then it was right after that moment that it occurred to me, I'm looking at a mirror. I'm seeing myself in the mirror. And I had never seen myself like this because I was physically transformed, and I had had such a break in time. And I had this moment of realizing that I had never referred to myself as beautiful. That every moment of my life up until the point that I lost my vision was me looking in the mirror and noticing my imperfections and noticing what I needed to work on. And not nicely, not even in a nice way, not like you're doing good, but you could tone those abs a little. Like, it was brutal. And so having that experience really opened me up to, wow, I can't believe I've never felt that feeling of self-love before. And I can't believe that I spent decades looking in the mirror and saying mean things about myself. And I have a little resolution that I carry around in my heart now, that I'm not allowed to talk about myself that way anymore. And I would just go ahead and go get naked, look at the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror, and just look at your beauty and see what's beautiful and see what the blessings are, because it's a blessing that we're able to see that, and we have to hold on to seeing that. So that would be my advice.
Wow, what a powerful story. Thank you so much for reminding us that. Everyone, I can feel that we all took that in, and that was a really potent, meaningful share. So thank you so much. How can our viewers connect with you? Or I forgot to ask you that.
Yeah, offline. I'm like, I don't know. I don't have a health brand. I'm not I know that a lot of your amazing guest speakers and a lot of amazing people in the space have built businesses out of this. And I haven't, so I don't have a public brand or anything, but certainly anyone who comes your way who wants to have a conversation with me is welcome to. I have some friends now who I told you who are good friends because they hunted me down after they heard me speak. So you're welcome to reach out on their behalf. And I would love to be back and talk more about it. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with your tribe, with your people, and in your delightful presence as usual.
Such an honor to have you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. We'll see you next time. Lots of love to you. Lots of love to all of you listening. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.